Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. So just to introduce our panel, our first panellist is Tony Collins. So Tony is the Principal Officer in the Heat Policy Division in the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications. So Tony is responsible for heat policy and schemes, district heating policy and the transposition of the Renewable Energy directives, in addition to being the lead contact for the Heat and Built Environment Task Force, which Minister Ryan would have referred to. So thanks, Tony, for joining us today. Next up is Fergus. Fergus Sharkey is Head of Business Support and Transport with the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. Fergus's team is responsible for working with SMEs, large industry and the transport sector to provide supports for energy efficiency, including advice, training on energy management and monitoring and reporting, best practice and project development, and grants and financial supports. Fergus is a chartered engineer with experience in the power generation, renewables and energy efficiency sectors, and prior to joining SEI he worked with the ESB. Next up is Redmond. Redmond is Assistant Principal Officer in the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. So Redmond is the Bioenergy Policy Lead in the department, focusing on energy efficiency, deployment of renewable technologies at farm level and the supply of bioenergy feedstocks as key agricultural contributions to the energy transition. And Redmond's main work at the moment is the National Biomethane Strategy and a number of other bioenergy policy projects. Our next speaker is Valerie Hughes from the Department of Transport. Valerie is the Assistant Principal Officer in the Energy, Air and Adaptation Division, leads the implementation of the Renewable Fuels Transport Policy within the Department of Transport, and sits within the Department's Climate Action Division, which is responsible for developing and delivering climate action policy for the transport sector in line with Ireland's national and international obligations. Thanks, Valerie, for joining us. And finally, Paddy Phelan is our IrBEA President and CEO of the South East Energy Agency. So Paddy is also an Executive Committee member of the Wind Farmers Association and Committee member of the European Biogas Association. Manages the multidisciplinary team in the South East, not-for-profit, locally acting regional energy agency. So that's our panel. We are running a bit tight for time, but we'll get through our panel discussion. So first, Tony, maybe if we could start with yourself and maybe just ask you for an update on the recently closed Renewable Heat Obligation Scheme. Consultation closed last week, and maybe if you could, I know delegates would be interested in hearing, what are the next steps, the broad timelines for design and completion of that design, and maybe the impending launch of the Renewable Heat Obligation.
Thanks, Sean. So as you'll be aware, the consultation closed last week, so we had extended it by a week just to allow a few additional respondees to come back. Detailed analysis ongoing now in terms of the submissions that were provided. So look, that'll obviously take a bit of time. There was over 60 submissions from across the sector, suppliers, consumers, customers, all sorts. So look, that'll feed into the final design of the RHO, and we are still working towards a high-level design of the scheme to be, published in and around the end of the year. And that's our trajectory, with then obviously the supporting legislation and regulation to follow in 2024.
Very good, and we also acknowledge President Neve as well, and we look forward to working with Neve and yourself and the actual providing feedback and assistance regarding the design if you require that from us. So moving on from that then, obviously the RHO feeds into a broader heat policy maybe within the department. So could you give us an idea of what your work is in that area regarding the broader renewable heat policy within the department?
Sure. So as part of the CAP commitment, we're developing a heat policy statement which draws heavily on the work of the SEAI and the National Heat Study. So essentially the heat policy statement will put the heat study into implementation phase, I suppose. It is a policy statement because there's an awful lot of work going on. We've seen the District Heating Steering Group report. The biomethane strategy is in development, and we'll probably talk to that in a minute. The RHO, so it's gathering all of these different elements that we're working on, pulling them all together and just setting them out into a cohesive document, I suppose.
Okay, and moving on from that, you mentioned about the biomethane strategy. We understand it's going to be launched in the next few weeks, so is there any high-level perspectives from the department in terms of that, and what it's going to maybe contain, or what's the I know you probably can't tell us today, but just, any high-level perspectives you'd like to share in terms of broader context in terms of developing the biomethane sector here in Ireland, from a heat perspective?
I'll probably leave some of the detail to Redmond here on the panel as well. Just in terms of where we're at on delivery timeframes, it will be probably pushed out a couple of weeks or towards the end of the year, given the complexity of it. It is the subject of a cross-departmental working group with state bodies and agencies in, and I think KPMG, who are here as well, have supported the development of the strategy so far. It is looking at developing a sector almost from scratch, so I think what we're looking certainly to do is make sure that it is as right as possible before we publish. So our expectation would be to go to government possibly towards the end of November, early December.
Okay. I'll come back to Redmond in a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes about the strategy, but maybe Fergus, if I could go to you. Could you tell us about, I know you work closely with Tony and his team, but could you tell us a little bit about your own work, what SEI do in terms of the supports you offer to business across transport and heat, and just give us an outline of what you do for attendees here today who might be looking to get some supports.
Yeah, so I'm the head of business supports and transport, and I guess what that means is for this audience, I'm responsible for all of the business focus programs in SEAI, which all came together under my management actually at the start of last year. So the support scheme for renewable heat would be one that attendees are very aware of, which we can talk about. We have the Exceed scheme. We have a support scheme for energy audits, a voucher scheme that gives free audits to SMEs. We have the non-domestic microgeneration scheme, which has recently been expanded and is like a runaway train at the moment. And we have various other, what we would broadly describe as advisory supports. So SME training, large industry energy network, where we come together, share best practice, drive kind of support with decarbonisation planning and scoping projects and so on.
Okay, and just, I know you mentioned the SSRH, and we've worked closely with you and with Ray in the teams and SEI around the SSRH and all aspects associated with it over the last number of years. I think we have a slide maybe which Stephen can put up just to give us an idea of the current uptake in terms of the SSRH. So maybe if you want to give us a quick summary, Fergus, on that.
Yeah, so I mean, the summary, Paddy talked about it there at the start. The uptake has not been what would be expected. I think that would be somewhat of an understatement. I think you have to look at this as two schemes. There's an operating aid or tariff for biomass and biogas, and there's an investment aid or a grant for heat pump systems. And within these schemes, there's a completely different story emerging. And I just have some of the key trends and stats up here that I'll talk through. I think people can read them. The biomass side has been steady but slow. Typically, over the 4 years it's been in operation, you're talking about 10 million of offers are made per annum. The majority of these are small-scale projects. And within that, there's a heavy prevalence of the agricultural sector, of hotels and nursing homes. Only 1/3 of those offers then have progressed to investment, so that they've actually gone and then made the investment with the offer in hand. And although we expanded the scheme to the ETS sector from March this year, there are some state aid questions over that at the moment, but that's our intention. We haven't had any inquiry for large-scale biomass plants to date from the ETS sector. And when I look at it and I try and diagnose where the issues are, I think there's some internal issues that we can address, but I think there's a major perception barrier which maybe we'll come back to in a while. The key stats on that are we've made 107 offers with 6 in progress, 6 sitting with us at the moment.
By in progress you mean they've applied but they're being in the application
exactly.
process?
6 live open offers, if you wish, that don't have open applications. And then of them, 12 have already been cancelled by the applicant, so it's a net of 95 live offers, if you wish. And that gives a total 15-year commitment of 38 million, which against what Eamon Rice said, the 300 million, you can get a sense that it's far off where we need to be. That's about 25 kilotons of CO2. And of those projects, this is the key thing, So they've got offers in hand, they've got very attractive commercial propositions in place. 34 of them are on the payment cycle, with about another 3 to go on the payment cycle in the next number of weeks. So we're at about 35, 36 on the payment cycle. So that's the story of it. It's slow, it's steady, it's not scaling to the extent it could. And I believe there's a couple of challenges there that we can discuss. On the heat pump side, what I'd say is we didn't have a heat pump side until we made change. We didn't have a heat pump grant, really. There's a lot of restrictions within it that were designed in that needed to come out, and they did in March this year, and that's just changed the game completely on that. At the moment, we have a predominance of heat pump applications for the scheme. The figures aren't huge, but what I would say is we've supported a significant amount of heat pump projects outside of this in our community grant and our Exceed grant over the last number of years. And they're in blue chip buildings, blue chip industry. These tend to be large multi-million euro investments. We're starting to see district heating projects come to us because people often forget that the SSRH actually is a district heating scheme, and we might have to make some changes to facilitate these larger projects that are now in the offing. We have technically funded some district heating schemes, but they would be more what we would term as communal heating. Okay. So we really see that shift happening, that there is a huge demand for heat pumps. I think that's going to grow. I don't see any indication that the biomass side of the scheme is going to grow over the next number of years. And you can just see some of the stats there on the heat pumps. We have 5 offers ever in almost 5 years of that scheme. We've 12 live at the moment. That amounts to about 4 to 5 million of potential offers. We've only made 500,000 to date. That's before that, but by the end of the year, we'll have another 4 or 5 million out in the market. And that's growing all the time. You know, there's a significant pipeline coming at us.
And in terms of the biomass, because that's what people are interested in hearing today and talking about today, why do you not think, or what do you think are the perception issues around biomass? It is a well-funded scheme, it's a well-designed programme. What, in your opinion, are those perception issues, and how can we deal with those?
Yeah, so there is a perception out there that the scheme is complex and bureaucratic. I think there's a level of fairness in that, but you know, obviously coming from SEI's point of view, I see the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I think, you know, some of that needs to be toned down a little bit. I think that the more major perception barriers. So we went out last year as part of our annual review of the scheme. We did what we called a non-financials factor evaluation, which really was looking at this kind of stuff. It was looking at the bureaucracy and how people perceived accessing the scheme. And there was 18 recommendations around that. All of them have been implemented, but we have to do a bit more work on that. But when we asked about perceptions, there wasn't a single respondent that said that they had a preference for a biomass heating system. Everybody said quite the opposite. And the barriers that, the perception barriers that were thrown up was that it's not sustainable, that there's air quality issues, that the supply chain isn't there, they had bad experiences in the past, they have issues about maintenance, about fuel deliveries, about fuel quality. All of this was out, all of the typical things that me and you would know about was out there. So I think that's a major thing. And I think, so that's our target audience, but I think it goes further than that. I think within the environmental NGOs, they're not for it. Within the political parties, I don't think there's significant support for it, and that's broadly across the political parties. As a bit of fun, and because there's not a great gender balance on the day today, I texted my mum before this, and I asked her what she thought. Would she swap over to a biomass heating solution? And she said, no, absolutely not. I want a heat pump. So just bringing my mum into the agenda here as well. So you've got this major perception barrier, and the support is extremely attractive, but obviously not attractive enough to get over those perceived risks.
I think based on that, we have plenty of work to do. Yeah. But then on the other side of that, you look at a hotel here, and you look at many examples across the country where biomass is playing a huge part and role. So we probably need to showcase those projects more, understand the role it currently plays, and I know as an organisation, we can very easily refute a lot of the perceptions that are brought up in terms of supply chain, in terms of feedstock and resource availability, in terms of air quality, new solid fuel regulations. So I guess there's a journey to be gone on here.
I think there's a significant amount more work to be done.
And it's the complete opposite to what's happening at a European level, where we see biomass being rolled out quite extensively across many different EU member states, and we can get into these issues in greater detail later. I'd like to move on to Redmond. I'll come back maybe to Fergus again in a minute. In terms of your own role, in terms of, could you give us an update on the biomethane strategy, where that's at, and maybe as a follow-on to what Tony has already told us?
Yeah, so I suppose just from DAFM's perspective, the strategy is being co-developed with DEC. A working group was established earlier on the year with government departments and agencies, and consultants were contracted in to carry out some work for the development of the strategy. The consultants then would have interviewed stakeholders to get their expert views, and almost 60 consultees were interviewed. So the strategy will be agri-centric, with the focus on farm diversification and alternative incomes for farmers, as well as decarbonising the energy system. The strategy is being pillared around 5 pillars that we feel is crucial for the biomethane industry to develop: their demand of biomethane, sustainability, bioeconomy and circular economy, economics of biomethane, and enabling policy requirements. And then just to say, the strategy is just the start of the process. Once the strategy is published, it'll come with a number of actions that'll have to be implemented by government and by industry.
Okay. You mentioned, Redmond, the broader focus on agriculture. And what role will agriculture play in the development and the delivery of the strategy? Maybe can you just expand slightly further on that?
Yeah, so I think Ireland's uniquely positioned to develop the biomethane industry because of our agricultural sector. If we look at Europe, 64% of biomethane is produced from agricultural feedstocks. In Denmark, this is 3/4 of their biomethane is produced from agricultural feedstocks. So if we compare Denmark with Ireland, it bodes well. The National Heat Study then has estimated that 80% of the feedstocks have to come from agriculture. Chagas have estimated that to reach our 5.7 terawatt target, slurry from 1.3 million animals, or 20% of the winter slurry, will be needed, and silage from 120,000 hectares. So without farmers, this industry won't work, it won't take off. Then also there's the opportunities for farmers to maybe own or co-own some of these AD plants. These AD plants at farm level might be on a smaller scale, but allow for farmers to use their own feedstock and decarbonise their energy at an agricultural level. Look, they're not going to make a massive difference when it comes to meeting our national target, but they might have a role to play in the social acceptance of AD around the rural communities.
And just in terms of the broader agricultural benefits, how can biomethane help agriculture, and is it going to be used as a strategy to encourage alternative land use? Or?
Yeah, so I suppose agriculture will benefit from diversifying through AD and land diversification, and then an alternative income. So there's probably unproductive land at the moment that can be, more feedstock can be grown off. This will allow farmers to diversify and improve their income, particularly in low enterprise areas. Then there's also the role of digestate. In Ireland, we buy almost 350,000 tonnes of chemical nitrogen. Digestate can substitute some of this. This allows farmers, again, to farm in a more climate-friendly manner than they already are. And again, it's encouraging the bioeconomy side of the area. And then also, look, this sector is new, and once it develops, if we reach our targets again, it can create up to 3,000 jobs in rural communities.
Okay, thanks, Redmond. And I guess we'll maybe come back to you in a few minutes with maybe further questions. I see there's a couple of questions coming in through the Slido, but if I could move on to you, Valerie. Obviously, potentially biogas, biomethane can be used in transport, and as well as liquid biofuels and other fuels. But in June 2023, you were involved in publishing the Renewable Fuels Policy. Can you give us a summary of what the policy contains, and what the key measures are within that, and maybe its relevance to our own members here.
Certainly. Well, as you said, we published the updated Renewable Transport Fuel Policy Statement towards the end of June this year. The Minister reviews and publishes a policy statement every 2 years, setting out a number of policy actions for the ongoing implementation and development of renewable transport fuel policy and the renewable transport fuel obligation. So within the policy statement itself, it sets out the scope of the policy, including looking to the how we will seek to achieve the RES-T, that's Renewable Energy Share and Transport, under the Renewable Energy Directive and forthcoming third Renewable Energy Directive that we must implement by the start of January 2025. It sets out the rates within the Renewable Transport Fuel Obligation, the Advanced Biofuel Obligation, the crop cap, and the decrease in the allowed amount of high ILUC feedstock within transport. Looking towards sustainability compliance, it sets out that we will, and we are actually having the first meeting, as the Minister mentioned, of working groups next week, including one looking at the biofuel sustainability, potential vulnerabilities within our system, and the potential for fraud risk. We'll also be establishing a group to look towards achieving our renewable energy share and transport under RED and our requirements under the National Energy and Climate Plan, and achieving that reduction in carbon emissions in transport and increase in the share in renewables within transport. And that will all be underpinned with review, analysis, and ongoing consultation.
Okay. And in terms of the policy, what do you think are the main challenges in terms of its implementation? Would you like to tell us what you think they are, maybe, Valerie, and how can we assist?
Well, the policy itself is very ambitious, as are our national and our international targets for renewable transport fuel and transport decarbonisation. Nationally, we have committed to a 50% reduction in transport emissions, and renewable transport fuels are a core mitigation measure within that. We have biofuel targets within the Climate Action Plan, and we must also achieve our renewable share, renewable energy and transport. We have a number of unresolved questions that we're looking at within the policy, including the quantum of renewable energy that may be needed in transport subsectors, the hierarchy of needs across economic sectors and transport within there, and ensuring transport has its share. So there are a number of measures there. Also, again, looking towards underpinning the sustainability criteria and ensuring that our renewable energy and our biofuels continue to support that sustainability and mitigating against risks, including indirect land use change.
And the main interest of the people here attending today would be what role has indigenous bioenergy, biofuel production got in supplying and contributing to the whole transport decarbonisation targets?
It has a significant role, and as set out within our biofuel study that we published about this time last year, it sets out the potential for indigenous supply out to 2030 to support our estimated need for renewables to meet our national and international targets. So it sets out there's a potential between 435 million to 735 million litres of indigenously produced biofuels. The challenge is there that there will still be a reliance on imported feedstocks because there is a low recoverable rate of indigenous feedstocks.
Okay, thanks very much, Valerie. And if I could just quickly move on to Paddy, I think Fergus's comments have triggered some interaction with you on the Slido, so we'll come to them in a minute. But Paddy, do you want to take up maybe on this whole piece about biomass and the perception of it? And what's your views on that and feedback?
Yeah, I suppose it's important to acknowledge what Fergus is saying.
Yeah.
It's something that many of us, going back to the older schemes, even the noughties, the challenge of installing bioenergy, biomass systems is one that has to be designed properly, and it's one that has to be maintained and operated properly. And I think a lot of that age-old fear maybe that you're feeling or sensing or getting when you go out on the ground in relation to the equipment or the technology or the installation is from historical schemes or historical challenges. So it is, on that front, it's up to the industry to take that challenge forward, correct it. I think it's very important to acknowledge that there are some excellent installations out there operational for many years. And those actors, some large pharmaceuticals, really like dispatchability, quality of the power they're getting from heat and, in some cases, power from biomass. Its stability in terms of their telemetrics within controls within their own pharmaceutical plants, which can be very sensitive to unstable grid positions or unstable grid conditions, which we're seeing more and more of in terms of the grid stability. So there's a whole knowledge piece there and understanding. There's the best fit for every different solution out there, every house, every home, every business. So I think fundamentally appreciating that air quality is dealt with very, very substantially, led by the Austrians 2 decades ago. So we're fielding the same questions they solved in Austria 25 years ago in terms of how you manage the emissions piece. And then there's the carbon capture opportunity. So this circular economy that the Minister spoke about, and we know that stack capture of carbon is a significant opportunity and a future market. So in the round, I think bioenergy most certainly has a role, and that's coming from a practical on-the-ground experience. I do understand why some actors may be resistant, or not resistant, but they may not even be aware that it's an option. I do sense that the main trend has been in heat pumps and its development. And there are opportunities around high-temperature heat pumps. But typically speaking, low-temperature hot water can be provided by heat pumps where there's maybe return temperature. Once you get into very large delta Ts, heat pumps will struggle. So proper design, proper options, I think, for the design, consulting, specification world, it's educating those on the opportunities and the best fit. I think there's room for all. Okay. Coming back to the NGOs and the sustainability, bioenergy itself runs through the rule of RED 2 and subsequent RED 3 much faster than current fossil power would, for example. And why fossil power isn't run through the same ringer to get to the field, obviously it's trying to get them off the field. So just in terms of the sustainability factors and aspects that are sometimes flagged and highlighted about, the burning of forests, the bioenergy resource is something that people fundamentally need to understand and they need to be educated upon. And until people fully understand the gambit of the forestry resource or other energy crop resources and its potential in terms of the whole biodiversity sphere it sits in and the circular economy. And I think, to quote one of the Bioenergy Europe technical experts, if you leave that tree there for 250, 300 years and it captures all that carbon and the wind knocks it over and you leave it in the forest to rot, it will emit that carbon regardless. So that's an understanding of life, biodiversity and appreciation, and really getting the education piece right so people can be informed to make the decision or make the ask and understand from a specification and design perspective. I think I'm heading over to the Royal Institute of Architects conference, so I have to leave here shortly to talk about retrofit. But that wider design space, design team space that you would see on larger projects, and particularly around facilities management, need to be educated and trained on the opportunities, because there are absolute shining light examples in Ireland. We don't have to go to Europe to see them. They're here for years, both in heat pumps, and as Fergus would know, I'm a supporter of all, and I believe they all have a role to play. And there are, in my opinion, there are enough large heat users and medium to SME scale heat users so that would be suited to bioenergy as a heat solution. And it's really about this industry and this association making them aware of the opportunity, and it's ultimately their decision. Some will pick heat pumps and some will pick the other. So fundamentally, it's up to the industry to go. The schemes are there, supports are there, the supply chain is there, and the air quality and sustainability are all captured very clearly under directives and very clearly under sustainability criteria right throughout Europe.
Okay, thanks very much, Paddy. Just a couple of questions have come in here. The first one was for you, Fergus, about the perceptions. What was SEI going to maybe try and do about these on the sustainability and the other ones? So would you be able to maybe tell us about that?
We're obviously doing a lot already. We have a whole section around renewable heating, specifically biomass on our website, and we have significant level of guidance around design and implementation and operation. We obviously put together case studies of projects. I think we have 9 or 10 of them now across hotels, agriculture, CJ Sheeran are in there, we're in the kind of timber industry. So we have a lot of them, but I would say when we put them up on social media, we get a lot of negative feedback, a significant amount of negative feedback. And I'm a little bit reticent at the moment because we're putting these commercial companies forward under our banner and they're getting negatively.
Why is that?
I think just
well, I mean, look, social media is a cesspool anyway.
Paddy, you wanted to come in there?
I think it's important to note, I mean, it's 7 years ago or 8 years ago that I was part of the SEI tent at the ploughing match, and we had the Irish wind farmers stand up, and SEI came over and asked us to take it down because there was a lot of issues in the Midlands about wind energy. So media should not dictate what we do and don't support. I mean, we have to be brave, we have to be bold.
Oh yeah, I don't think there's any issue on that.
NIMBYism is something that it's going to get in the way of us solving all of the issues that Eamon was talking about earlier. 1.5 or 1.8 degrees, I think he mentioned in September, outside of norm. The citizen has to be educated as well.
Yeah.
Okay,
so we're doing a lot more work now on this perceptions piece at the moment.
Okay.
Both at a public level, at a small business level, and an industry level.
Okay.
So we're scoping that out. It's something we want to do because I do feel this is a major barrier that we have to grapple with, and we have to give the right information. And you can't shout it down. You have to do it in an informed, structured, and evidence-based way.
Just picking up on a couple of questions, because I know we have quite a few questions come in. One for you, Fergus, there as well, while we're on it. Just the uptake of the operation date for biogas within SSRH.
Yeah, we haven't had a single application.
So,
beg your pardon, we had one.
And is that going to be, are the rates for that going to be reviewed, or is that something that's in your...
we have to review them on an annual basis. I'll hold my hand up and say last year we reviewed the biomass tariffs and we didn't substantially review those rates again. We're going to have a look at them again. We've better data now in the heat study in terms of the cost of biomethane. They were probably working off relatively old data. The key challenge with that is there's such a spectrum of cost in biomethane. If it's from food waste, it could be 4 or 5 cents a kilowatt hour. If it's from silage slurry mix, it could be 10 or 12 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's very
just
different.
on that, maybe for Tony and Fergus, and not necessarily a question, but feedback we're getting is that the SSRH scheme is there. It's designed from the biogas perspective from heat. It could be a mechanism in the short term by which we could get biomethane into heat if the rates, but I know you'd probably have some modelling to do, Fergus, and there'd probably be revisions to be made potentially to it. But the point I'm making is that there is a support scheme there. It could be expanded upon in the short term to act as a mechanism to support biomethane within the heat sector, and I think that should be considered. And there's quite a lot of questions on biomethane. We won't get to them all here now, but just maybe, and again, you're welcome to comment on whether you can address them or not, because you may not be able to address them because there could be information contained within the strategy. So can DEC give an update on CapEx or OpEx for support for plants in the biomethane strategy? I don't know, Tony, can you answer that at this stage? That would be in the strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's a key component of the strategy, and it's something that is being examined on a cross-departmental level, as I said.
What is, quickly run through these because we're tight for time, what is the AD plant scale recommended in the strategy, or is Redmond maybe, you know, and will there be investment for the construction itself, or is it going to be operational aid? Again, there are probably questions I may not want to answer because but feel free to give us your feedback.
Look, the target is the 150 to 200 plants, and that is a strategy, but again, like Tony said, it's subject to government approval, still the strategy is, so can't really preempt anything.
Paddy, maybe you could take this one. AD has a bad perception or reputation. How do you feel we could change opinions within the farming community and in the broader community? Quickly now, because we're under pressure for time, but just if you want to comment on that.
I don't think our jurisdiction in terms of hinterland and people is altogether different in terms of a rural area such as the north of Ireland. If you look at the north of Ireland, when the supports came in, farm-based AD saw 296 AD plants commissioned in about a 24-month period. So I don't think there's any great difference between that rural hinterland and maybe the hinterland of the island, the rest of Ireland. So it can be done, I suppose, is the point. What's the barrier? The barrier is probably milk price.
Competition.
While milk price is high, dairy farmers will pay for land to get grass and don't want additional competition in the sector for grass-based biomethane. So I think there are other sources of renewable resource to be considered. And again, I'll reference back, we did a study last year on the regional resource in terms of bioenergy, and there's a broad gambit. I was involved at the weekend in planting cover crops between tillage. All these resources that exist to coincide alongside existing food production. It's not to pit food against energy, it's to get the two to work again in a circular economy way.
Okay, quite technical questions on the AD. Probably won't be able to, you know, is there a recommended scale or size? Will a market for selling silage be developed? Industry are holding off on building these facilities on the basis of strategy. Will it contain details of the levels of support? Do you want to comment on any of those, guys, on those items?
Look, I suppose there's been significant engagement carried out by KPMG in the development of the strategy and where we're at the moment. And look, it is at a very advanced stage. As I said, we'd be looking certainly to get to government before the end of the year. The scale and I suppose spatial distribution of AD plants has certainly been considered. And look, I suppose in terms of the ideal model or what would work for both delivery of this renewable gas in addition to providing the diversification opportunities in the engagement of the ag sector, it's all, I mean, it's as I said at the outset, we're looking to build something from almost scratch, and it is a complex area, so it's something that the strategy is looking at in detail across a number of issues like those. Okay,
again, market for silage, so I think, Redmond, you've touched on that in terms of the opportunity which will exist for farmers and the potential development of a market for silage, so we won't go into the detail of that. How will ADB infrastructure be located in rural Ireland? Will it be farm-based or cooperative? Again, I expect the strategy will outline some of that detail, and the scales are completely different and the support requirements as well. Again, centralised scale versus the economics of large, centralised versus smaller scale. There's a question here, and I know, Paddy, maybe you can address it. What supports we put in place to support stack capture of bio-CO2?
I know there's a lot of work underway in Europe in terms of trying to understand what that market would require. And I know of recent that, I suppose from an Irish perspective, we're behind the curve in a number of support schemes, but in Europe there is a move away from maybe FITs or contracts for difference and looking at kind of market-led incentives, so obligations or others. So I think we have to look at the full basket of revenue for those who are prepared to invest in this technology. So I suppose you would expect that there would be a support in place to get the first movers off the ground, because the first movers are often the ones that get get the most challenging and provide most of the feedback for policy going forward. And thereafter, you would expect to see where it's, tangible carbon that's captured and measured, then that has its own value on the market. So it's really until you see the market value and you understand the cost of capturing the carbon that you can really define what supports might be needed to fill the gap.
Okay, I think we'll have to leave it at that. Unfortunately, we won't be able to get to all the questions which you've been, but maybe later in the day. So I'd like to thank all our panellists for joining us this morning. Tony, Fergus, Redmond, Valerie and Paddy. So show them a round of applause. So we are slightly behind time, but we hopefully will be able to make that up later in the day. So we'll take a 15 minutes, so we'll be back at 11:40 to recommence. Thank you.